Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting episode of Caught on the Mic with Michael Clark. As most of you know, I am a pop culture junkie. I enjoy documentaries, and I have a great guest for you today. Scott Barber is the director of The Orange Years, a very great documentary about the more wholesome years of Nickelodeon, and a documentary about the band GWAR called Is GWAR. He is currently crowdfunding a new project through Kickstarter with Phil Moore from Nick Arcade from Nickelodeon called Game Changers. It is all about retro video games. We talk about all of these things and more on this episode. I can't wait for you to watch this. As always, listener and viewer discretion is advised. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, music and pop culture are the backbone of Caught on the Mic. I have fighters on my show, fitness people, paranormal experts, documentarians, actors, actresses, everybody from all walks of life, but it always kind of circles back to people I share a kinship with, specifically in the world of music. Now, my next guest, he is the director and creator of a few documentaries, a few you may have heard of. The Orange Years, which is a documentary about Nickelodeon. No, not that documentary about Nickelodeon. A more wholesome one about the years that predate some of the controversy. I watched it last night. I was smiling from ear to ear as soon as it was done. And he's also directed a film called Is GWAR, about the band GWAR. And that is equally as fantastic. And as a music lover, you know I am totally into it. His next project is a project called Game Changers. Features Phil Moore from Nickelodeon's Nick Arcade. They are doing a Kickstarter to crowdfund the project. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Barber joins me on Caught on the Mic today. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. Like you said, we have a lot in common. So I think there's a lot to talk about, a lot to go over.
Yeah, for sure. What's funny is what pointed me to you was a mutual friend of ours, Taylor Morden, the director of Pick It Up Ska in the 90s and The Last Blockbuster, posted your Kickstarter yesterday. And I was like, oh shit, I got to talk to this guy. And so I just reached out to you through Facebook and we made this happen pretty quick.
Yeah, we did.
So how did you know Taylor? Is it just from the documentary community or the film community?
Yeah, I do that a lot where if I see somebody that is like other filmmakers that are doing cool stuff, I'll just reach out to them. Kind of the same way we found each other and just say, hey, I really like what you did. You want to chit chat sometime? Just talk, see if I can help you, you can help me. And obviously, Taylor is the king of crowdfunds. So he's given me some advice on this. But yeah, the last time I had spoken to him was when he had just wrapped up The Last Blockbuster, and that was getting ready to come out, which that's a great one, for sure. So that I met another guy, Tommy Avalone, that way. I don't know if you know him. He did the Bill Murray stories, and he just did one about Barney, why everybody hates on Barney so much for Peacock. But that's how I met him.
That's fantastic. It is kind of a small world. And the thing that connects the three of us is we're all musicians as well. I did my time in the band world and, we could talk about that. And Taylor did his time in the band world. Whenever I watched his movie, Pick It Up Ska in the 90s, there were a lot of themes that really clicked with me. And the thing that I've noticed about his films and your films and just kind of the content that I create is as musicians, we dip our toes into a lot of different portions of pop culture, whether it be retro video games, Nickelodeon, GWAR. So what are some of the things that you're into that kind of inspire you?
I like weird stuff. I guess that's what I would say. I like stuff that both is kind of, stuff that everybody can relate to, but also has a niche kind of at the same time, and that's really like, Is GWAR. That was my second documentary. on one hand, it looks very niche. They're this band that dresses up as monsters and sprays the audience with blood and guts and all sorts of stuff. But it also, their story is something that everyone can kind of relate to, even kind of the stuff we've already talked about. You know, these, do you stay true to your dream? How hard do you want to stay? How hard do you want to go with that? You know, at what point will you back away? And at what point will you say, no, I'm going to keep going through all this? And what if you're presented with that golden ticket of, hey, if you just change what you're doing, I can make you a millionaire? What would we do if we were in that position? You know, the whole idea of, do you follow your dreams or do you make money? I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. So yeah, with a lot of this, and even with, you know, the new show that you mentioned, Game Changers, I'm really excited to talk about that with Phil Moore from Nickelodeon, Nick Arcade. That's what we want to do with that one. You know, yeah, everyone can kind of go, oh, retro video games. You know, that's kind of what hooks you and gets you in. Oh yeah, I played Nintendo, I played arcades, I played Atari, whatever, PlayStation. But then once you're there, it's like the human story of these people that were creating this. That's why it's called Game Changers, you know, video games, but also people that changed the whole industry in a way, you know, somebody that did something that had never been done before at the time.
Yeah, it sounds like your affinity for making documentaries is very similar to mine with podcasting. It's like taking that onion and peeling the layers back, because there's so much more. The story behind the story is sometimes as fascinating as the story itself. And
totally, yeah.
So how did you land on this path? What's kind of your origin story?
Okay, yeah, I had gone to school for acting, and I kind of did that, and I kind of made some movies with my friends up in Dallas. One of them, Jared Costa, who's also working on Game Changers. And the kind of idea, Dallas is very, you know, it's I don't want to say conservative, but it's more like industrial, commercial, like not as artsy. I don't want to throw any shade. There's a lot of cool stuff that comes out of there, but it wasn't right for me. So we were just making our own stuff. We're like, let's just make our own movies, you know, and then I can be in them, you know, cast myself the way I want to. I kind of fell in love with that more, you know, writing and directing and cinematography. I kind of like that a lot more than trying to act. I kind of realized that wasn't for me. So I started doing that. And then I became a father and a husband. And I said, oh my God, the only skills I have are artistic. How am I going to make any money? So I just kind of started a video production business, making whatever I could, you know, for money. Within reason, within legality. But, you know, I did that. And, you know, then once it worked out well, you know, me and my wife had our own video production business. And then after we were kind of settled, financially stable, I kind of said, well, you know, I want to make a movie now that I know that I can, now that I know my family's taken care of. But how do you make a movie if you don't have a ginormous budget? And I'd always been a fan of documentaries. I said, well, I know I can make a documentary, because I was kind of doing that for other people. You know, I'd do like a corporate gig where I'd go interview a bunch of people and then splice it all together in a little promo video. And I said, that's really the same thing, just on a bigger, cooler scale. So me and my friend Adam, who had grown up together, and Nickelodeon just meant a lot to us growing up, we kind of said, well, if we're going to make a documentary, let's make something we're passionate about. So Nickelodeon was something we were passionate about, and we kind of did some research and said, okay, there's actually a story here more than just member berries. And so we just did it. we crowdfunded it, and then we did it, jumped in just head first with no parachute at all, which, look, you know, hindsight's 2020. Looking at it now, I'm like, that was so stupid, but it wasn't, because it worked out. But, you know, we didn't have anybody booked. I didn't know anybody at Nickelodeon. But, you know, we made that. And then kind of as that was wrapping up, you know, I'd always been a fan of GWAR. I was making a list of things that would be cool to do a documentary about that hasn't already been done. And GWAR was one of them. And randomly, one of my friends was opening up for GWAR. His name's Rocky Moon. He's in a band called American Sharks. And he was like, oh, I know those guys. I had Thanksgiving at their house one year. And that was actually what kind of made me want to do, like, my vision for the documentary was just thinking about Thanksgiving with GWAR. You know, what are these guys like? outside of what, you know about them as these, the story is that they're these, space monsters that came to Earth. They hate Earth. They want to kill us all. So their concerts are kind of like a little mini musical almost. There's acting and there's dinosaurs and all robots that come out. And so it just worked out really well that I was able to go right from one to the other because he hooked me up with them. And I talked to them and they kind of decided I was the right guy for the job. And so we did This Is GWAR. That was an amazing experience. So awesome getting to work on that. I feel so honored. And that one came out. It debuted at Fantastic Fest, which was really cool. I'd always been a fan of Fantastic Fest, big fan of horror and all that stuff. And so to get to debut there was super cool. Unfortunately, COVID happened. So the fest was like, we were going to do this whole thing like GWAR was going to be there. We were going to do GWARioke, and awesome. Where people would do karaoke while they're getting sprayed with blood and stuff. But the whole thing had to be scaled back because of COVID, unfortunately. But it was still amazing. And then we sold that one to Shudder. So that's on Shudder and AMC Plus and those Shudder. I've been a fan of that since it came out. And so to get to work with them and to get to see, I mean, they're hands down of all the distributors and streamers I've ever worked with. They've been not even close, the best. So awesome and have taken care of us, even though they're smaller than some of the other ones. They've actually treated us with respect and I just couldn't say enough good stuff about those guys.
Yeah. I had Stephen Cognetti, the director of Hell House LLC, on my show this last fall, and I love found footage horror myself. And so I love that whole series and that whole franchise. And Shudder is fantastic because he's partnered with them now as well. And gosh, they are such a great network. I couldn't recommend people that are just listening to this that want to be entertained, subscribe to that platform. You can subscribe through Amazon Prime and what have you. But that's awesome. So from these things that have happened and kind of delineating these experiences a little bit, getting to meet and work with Weird Al and Alex Winter, and what's been kind of the most awestruck you've been so far? Because this journey is really just kind of starting out for you.
God, that's so hard to say. Because that's one thing I kind of like to say is like, that's your payment. Obviously we're not getting rich making documentaries. Right. But to be able to say, yeah, I've met Alex Winter, I met Ethan Embry, I met Kenan Thompson, I met Weird Al, Thomas Lennon is awesome. So I don't know, there's certain people that are really famous, and the Nickelodeon one, even people that aren't really technically that famous, but they're famous to me,
right? Because
I grew up watching them.
Yep.
There's a guy named Danny Cooksey who was on Salute Your Shorts. And he was also the redheaded kid with a mullet in Terminator 2, John Connor's friend who doesn't sell him out. Like, we're all only alive because, whenever Robert Patrick asked him, have you seen this boy? He said no. But he was in a band called Bad for Good that I was into when I was a little kid because they were little kids too. It was Steve Vai put together a group of kid musicians and he was the singer. Check them out. It's really funny, but unfortunately their album came out in 1991 and they were kind of this kid hair metal band. Whoops, wrong time.
Right.
But so that was really cool to get to meet him because I loved him as a musician. I loved him. He was in Terminator 2. He was Budnick on Salute Your Shorts. He was like the metal kid on Salute Your Shorts. So if I had to say, I would say the Weird Al one, and I'll tell you why. Because there's so many people that it's all a tie.
Right.
Alex Winter from Bill and Ted, that's insane. And also he's a great documentary filmmaker.
Yes, he just did one on YouTube.
Yeah. His stuff is amazing. So the only reason I'll say Weird Al beats some of the other ones, because it's not just about the person. We interviewed Weird Al in this recording studio in LA, where the Beach Boys recorded Pet Sounds.
Oh, wow.
And like the Foo Fighters. It's like the recording studio.
Right.
One of our producers, Bill Parks, he lives in LA and he's really good at finding locations. And he's like, yeah, my friend has a studio. He's going to let us use it for Weird Al. It's kind of a nice studio. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. It's a nice studio. And then I get there and I was like, oh, this isn't a nice studio. This is like
the nice
The
studio.
studio. Yeah. Like all that stuff, like Mamas and the Papas and all that
Oh, so
stuff
was it at Sound
was
City?
there. It's not Sound City. It's like North. It's changed names recently. I want to say like North by Northwest. There's a really funny video where the Foo Fighters recorded Concrete and Gold there.
Yeah.
And there's a really funny video of Dave Grohl talking about what it's like. And he's like, yeah, I was in the bathroom and next to me was Sean from Boys to Men. And I'm like, hey, what's up, dude? You want to be on our album? And he's like, oh, and then Kenny G was in there. I was like, hey, you want to come be on our album? And he's like, Justin Timberlake was there. Like that kind of shows you what it's like, that just you'll run into all these different people there. I mean, because everybody records there. And so, and then we were there with our little documentary crew. So that was pretty cool when Weird Al came in to see him be starstruck, because he comes in and he's so nice, you know, like that's one where like, I mean, Weird Al, if you're an 80s kid, what a hero, you know, and to see him be so nice and so kind. He didn't come with a posse. He came by himself. You know, with documentaries, we always say, you know, we'll feed you, we'll provide transportation, we'll provide hair and makeup. And he was like, dude, I don't need any of that, you know? And it's like, man, like you could command that. You know, Kenan Thompson was the same way. You know, Kenan Thompson's huge. That was for the Nickelodeon one. He was like, no, man, I'm just going to come by and have a good time. But when he sees they keep the Pet Sounds record there on the mixing board there at the studio, and he's like, oh, what's up with this? And we're like, oh, this is where they recorded it. And he was like, oh, really? So that was just kind of like a double awestruck thing there. So that's why that one wins out.
Yes, I think that is kind of another similarity between like podcasting and doing documentaries, because I've had several experiences like that. I'm 4 years deep into this podcast, and I've had similar experiences like that where you get to humanize people that you would otherwise idolize. You know what I mean? And there is a saying that goes, don't ever meet your heroes because they're only going to let you down. And I gotta say, I've had the opposite experience. Like, you sit down and you have a conversation with them and you talk to them like a human being. You give them an opportunity that, you know, traditional press and traditional media doesn't give them, as a documentarian and as a podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I 100% agree. Yeah, we actually used to say the same thing when we were working on Nickelodeon, because that was all childhood heroes.
Right.
You know, we were interviewing all people from our childhood who, you know, you can definitely idolize, you know,
right.
Because it's different. It's from when you were a kid, and everybody on that film was awesome. Like every single person. Kenan Thompson, so nice, so cool. I mean, for that guy to, I mean, you know, he's on, not only is he really famous, he's also on Saturday Night Live. So that dude's like busy.
Yeah.
You know, for him to come by and then at the end, he's like, hey, y'all, thanks for making this. I think this is going to be really cool. And we're like, thank us? Like, no, dude, like you just made our documentary by doing this. You know, Mark Summers, that's a huge one for me as an 80s kid. And he was like the first one we interviewed. And he was so nice and so cool. And then obviously, you know, Phil Moore, who we got to interview, he was Nick Arcade. That was like the jam, you know, it was like an 80s, 90s. It was early 90s. So it still had that vibe of the 80s where, you know, kids would play video games, like a game show, but they got to play video games. And Phil was the host, and he was such a good host. He kind of was the spiritual successor to Mark Summers. You know how Mark wasn't just Double Dare. He was like the Nickelodeon guy. Like when they needed somebody to just like introduce Nickelodeon Studios in Florida is opening up. Well, when Mark left, Phil took that place. Like he was like the Nickelodeon guy. So, you know, to get to meet him was super cool. And also just the fact that, you know, I was obviously, by what I'm working on, Game Changers, a docuseries about video games, I was a huge video game kid. And so to get to meet him was super, super cool. And then getting to work on this was even cooler because, you know, we interview him. So I have like about an hour with him, you know, we talk before and after, and then I email everybody to keep them in the loop about what's happening. But with this, to get to like brainstorm and work with him on stuff and see his passion for video games firsthand is so cool. So cool.
That's great, because that's exactly where I was going to go with that. Is because of this Nickelodeon experience, you got to build a relationship, not just okay, I've interviewed you, one and done, we're done here. You got to build a relationship with the childhood hero that you're now working with. So let's kind of get in the weeds on Game Changers and what really inspired that because retro gaming has definitely blown up even bigger than what it was in the post-COVID world. You know, people were looking for things to do, so collecting shit kind of
Yeah,
kind of became the thing.
totally.
So what was the genesis of that idea, and kind of where are you at on the process, and kind of give us a big overhead on what Game Changers is all about.
Okay. Yeah, I'm obviously a fan of like retro stuff of archival footage, documentaries, and I love video games. And so I like to do stuff that I'm passionate about, not just stuff that I think will sell. And so I kind of had been kicking that idea around for a while. I was like, how come nobody's ever done that? Like the movies that made us, and they did the toys that made us. I was like, just something like that, but about video games. I would watch that. And there's a lot of stuff out there that I keep track of what I want to make a doc or just ideas for documentaries. That's how all this stuff comes about. And there's so many of them that like you couldn't make a full documentary about. There's a lot of ideas. It's like you'd be stretching it too thin, but you could make an episode about it, So it kind of was everything I wanted. It'd be passionate. It'd be fun more than anything. And then also the stories that maybe couldn't last for 70, 90 minutes, but a 45-minute episode will be perfectly fine and really fun. No filler, all killer, no filler. And so the other thing was that I made my first two documentaries just totally punk rock, raised the money however I could and just made them and then sold them at the end, which luckily I did. That's awesome. Like everybody that invested in me, I was able to give them their money back plus more. So, it's good. A lot of times you don't make your money back or you just kind of break even, but it's just really risky, to spend like a year or two of your life working on this thing, borrowing money from people, and then hoping at the end, hope you sell it. And the documentary industry has changed a lot because there's so many of these big budget polished ones that are made by Netflix. The indie documentaries kind of get pushed out a little bit more and more and more. And so, I had a great time making those, but I was really scared to do one like that again. So I've been kind of trying to make a documentary with a company, like sell an idea to Netflix and make that, pitch stuff to people. And kind of what I found is it's like everybody wants murder.
Mm-hmm.
And, for the longest time, I was a fan of true crime stuff, and to an extent I still am, but I think at some point it can be a little exploitive, like, you hear about that Dahmer movie they made where, what's his name? Evan Peters did a great job. That guy's a fantastic actor. But then you read that like a lot of the murder victims in that were like, please don't make this. Like, you're not even telling the story accurately. Our son was murdered and you're kind of making it look like it was his fault. Please don't make this movie. And Netflix is just like, who cares? We're making it. And then they make it, and then you look at a lot of these documentaries and a lot of the families like, please don't do this. Like, we don't want everyone hearing these sordid details about how our daughter was brutally assaulted and all the stuff that happened to her. We don't want that out there, for people. And people are just like, don't care. We're doing it. Right. F off, And like, and again, to an extent, I think that true crime can, there's good sides to it because I think it can like give justice to victims. There's a lot of stuff where cases have gone cold and then true crime documentaries reignite that, and you see that happen. Mm-hmm. Documentaries help solve stuff. And I think that's really cool. Or just raising awareness for certain things that happen, or just kind of teaching us, hey, this can happen. Maybe you don't know that there's people out there like this and you need to. All that is to say is I just didn't want to do something about murder. And that's literally what everybody wants. I would pitch an idea and then would go, okay, so who dies in this?
Right.
Nobody, and there was some stuff that I'd bring because I knew, they want drama and all that. I'd bring stuff with like crime and heists and stuff like that. That's kind of fun. Like that documentary, Pez Outlaw. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think that's hilarious. I think that's awesome. And there's another one about art thieves that's really good. And there's another one, Pepsi, Where's My Jet?
Yeah.
That's not really crime, but it's kind of a lawsuit and stuff. I think that stuff's fun, opposed to, hearing about some little girl who was cut up and fed to dog. I just don't.
Agreed. Dude, I couldn't agree with you more. It was funny. You struck a chord with me because when my wife was like knee deep into that Dahmer series, like had a little bit of a moral dilemma with it myself.
Yeah.
And I thought about it and I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't know if this should be made for the sake of entertainment because realistically, kind of the things that you're creating, like are to give a little bit of enjoyment to people and like there's there's a difference between horror and true horror and crime for the sake of entertainment
Right.
and true crime
Right.
and like you said being very exploitive with what you're making. So like to hear that you're kind of going out on this niche and tapping into people's nostalgia and people's love for retro video games is fantastic.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and that was the thing, I wanted to do something where, because we have a Kickstarter going, and it's going really well. Obviously you do need some money to do it. You can work for free, but you've got all the legal stuff, all the traveling, all of that stuff that you have to pay for. And especially when you're trying to do a series, I was like, I really want to do a series. I think that would be really awesome to do. And yeah, it was just I wanted to do something that I would have fun with, but also that there would be a community, somebody that wants it. A lot of times I struggle with that because there's stuff that I think would be cool, but people are like, dude, that's you, man. That's you and your weird thing. But, I think that these stories, they are kind of niche, but I think there's a lot of people that are into that niche.
Right, absolutely.
Like, retro gaming is a niche, but there's a lot of people that are passionate about it. And I was like, I think that people would support this and want it. So that was kind of how we settled on doing it that way, because there's other video game documentaries out there. And there's a really great one on Netflix called High Score. And it kind of just walks you through the history of it. But there's never been one where it's like each episode is about a different game. This episode is just about Tomb Raider. This episode is just about Dragon's Lair. This episode is just about Myst. And so I just thought that'd be really cool. And then I thought about it and I was like, what if Phil Moore was kind of like the host of it? Wouldn't that be cool? And I was like, I feel like that would give people something more. Because, that's the thing. There's so many YouTubers out there that do a great job of making their own kind of mini documentaries. And I was like, well, what am I going to do that's different than that? And one, it's like, well, I want to interview the people that actually, it's not just me telling the story. We're actually going to hear the people. Phil says this in our Kickstarter campaign, the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. That's what makes it a little different. But then I was also, who wouldn't want to see a project with Phil Moore on TV talking about retro games again? I know there's a whole bunch of people that would want that. I would want that. And even just from our crowdfund, you can see he's a natural on camera. So I just thought that could be a little bonus thing for the fans as well. And he's really passionate about it. And so that's kind of how it came about. It's like, let's do something that's kind of like Movies That Made Us, but about video games. We're kind of saying a cross between Movies That Made Us and 30 for 30.
Yeah.
And then with Phil Moore, wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah.
And I just thought a lot of people would be into that. And I thought that I would be really into that. So I contacted him and I kind of had even said in my head, I was like, if he doesn't want to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to think of something else because I really want to partner with him. And when he said, I sent him an email and I said, kind of what I'm saying now, I want to do this thing where we focus on a different game every episode. And I said, like we could do Tomb Raider, we could do Baldur's Gate, Wolfenstein, Star Fox. And his reply was just, you had me at Star Fox. And at that point I knew, I was like, okay, yeah, this is the right guy. That's the guy.
Amazing. Yeah. Is there a specific game that you're looking forward to doing in particular? Like your favorite game?
I mean, Dragon's Lair. I like Dragon's Lair. And
like old school Atari Dragon's Lair?
Yeah, like the old Atari game or arcade game,
yes.
With Don Bluth. And I love it because, I mean, I think a lot of people are nostalgic for it. I mean, one, it's Don Bluth. You know what I mean? Like, besides video games, I mean, that's Land Before Time, American Tail. That's a dude that almost brought down Disney, you know? And it's a polarizing game. And I think that's pretty cool because for those that don't know, I mean, the graphics look like a Don Bluth movie. I mean, it's animated by Don Bluth. So this is the, early 80s where, you've got Pac-Man and Centipede and Zaxxon and Asteroids, things like that. And then you see this other game that's like, whoa, it's like better than graphics today. And it's like, whoa, I want to play that. I want to play that. And then when you play it, it's not actually really a video game. It's more of a choose your own adventure. You know, it ran off of a laser disc, which that's another thing. I've always thought it'd be cool to do a documentary about laser disc, but I don't know if there's enough. So there's so many aspects to it. You know, there's Don Bluth, laser disc. It's an 80s arcade. And then also I think the fact that it is universally loved, but there's also a lot of people that are like, screw that game, man. Like, I waited forever to play that game. And when I finally got there, you're not even really controlling Dirk. It's just like you push left here and you push right. It's just you're just pushing buttons to go to the next chapter. Right. So I don't know. That's one of my favorites. I'm really excited for Tomb Raider too, though, because I think there's a lot of people. That's a really cool game. And I think it's one of those things that was a zeitgeist, you know, like Lara Croft was like the Mario for that era, you know, like for that era of gaming, not even just like PlayStation or whatever, just in general. She became something like Sonic, you know, something bigger than just the game.
Yeah, because there was kind of a duality when the original Tomb Raider came out, with both being on the first PlayStation format and the first PC format, because there was a lot of people, it was their entry level into PC gaming as well. So that's fantastic. That's really exciting. So have you reached out to anybody else to participate in this series yet? Or can you say, are you at liberty to say as of yet?
Yeah, we have. We reached out to, I actually met some really great guys that were kind of working on a Dragon's Lair documentary. And so they have all the connections with Don Bluth and all of that already. And I told him about it. I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing. You want to kind of merge our projects into one, and the Dragon's Lair can be your episode, you know? And they were all about it. So so we have that one for sure. And then the thing that's funny, you know, I live in Houston, Texas, but I go to Dallas, Texas a lot. And Phil was actually working in Dallas for a while on a job. He's a producer. He produces shows. So he'll go live in a different city for a couple of months. And so we met there and we recorded our Kickstarter at the National Video Game Museum. And if anybody gets a chance to go there, it's amazing. I was telling Phil about it because he's not from Dallas and he wasn't really going out sightseeing. He was working. And I was like, oh, I'm going to record a video at National Video Game Museum. You're going to love it. And he's like, oh yeah, cool. I was explaining it to him. He's like, oh yeah, cool. But then when he got there, he was like, oh my God, it really is. It's amazing.
That's fantastic.
But I was really surprised as I looked into Dallas, like how much of the stories we want to tell was in Dallas. The id guys were Dallas,
wow.
Which that's huge as far as 3D first person shooter, but then also Duke Nukem 3D. Wow. A lot of those guys were out of there too. So, and they kind of all knew each other and they were kind of like friendly rivalry. So there was this whole scene because Texas Instruments, that everyone had like a TI calculator when you're a kid, was based out of Dallas in the, I think 60s and 70s, and I think even into the 80s. So you had all these tech guys that were there, and they had all these sons and daughters that were teenagers, because so many of us didn't have computers back then. I mean, to have a computer in the 80s, not everybody had one, and to be like a whiz at it and to be able to do stuff was super rare. So that's why all those people that were like 19 years old were making these games. They were the children of Texas Instrument people. So they had those computers there at their house and they learned how to be good at them. So because of that, there was this whole scene in the, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s of computer software was in, I think they called it like the Silicon Prairie,
right?
North Texas. So I'm excited to talk to those guys. I've reached out to them and we're kind of talking with them. And I hope everything works out because, we want to do Wolfenstein 3D. I think that would be really amazing. And then Duke Nukem 3D is another one that we really would love to do as well. And they're all based out of there.
That's awesome. So what are some of the other ideas that you have kicked around for future documentaries once you cross this benchmark? Have you started thinking that far ahead, or are you really just centralizing your focus on this right now?
Yeah, I always try to think of a couple of, like I just have a Google Doc where I'll be walking around and go, and I'll just write it in there. And so I kind of have to do that where I just keep a Google Doc where I just have like 100 ideas, and then I'll go through and cull them. I'm like, this one's stupid. This one's stupid. What were you thinking? What were you thinking? And then I'll do some research, and some of them I'm like, oh, this would be a cool idea, but there's not enough for a story. So I'll kind of cross those off the list. So there's a bunch of stuff that I like to do. I'd love to do another music documentary. I had a great time with that, just because I kind of get to put, two of my passions together. I'm passionate about music. I'm passionate about film. And I'm in talks with the band right now, because I was kind of spoiled though. I was like, GWAR is, I mean, what do I do from here? Because I mean, they make movies. They got nominated for an Oscar, for one of their movies, for the soundtrack for one of their, I mean, they make movies. They were technically like a Trauma style movie and a punk rock band that came together. I mean, there's just all this crazy stuff that's happened with them. I'm like, everything else is going to be boring to just tell, oh, here's these 4 or 5 musicians that got together. They did some drugs. Some guys got kicked out.
Right.
They had a falling out. They made it. Then they changed their sound a little bit. And, but there's one in mind that feels like a natural successor to GWAR that I think would be really fun to work on. And they're an older CBGB era band with a female singer.
Okay.
Very similar to GWAR. And I'm talking with them right now, but nothing's been confirmed. But that one would be if that one happens, I will be beyond thrilled, because that would be like my dream to get to do after that.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I do have a couple that we are pitching to, kind of like I was saying before, where like you have an idea and you pitch it places.
Right.
And luckily I was fortunate enough to find people that aren't just wanting death. And so we're kind of working on that. I have a really cool, like, one that's about like a baseball card heist that we're pitching around. And that one would be really fun. And it's funny. It goes back to what you were saying, the pandemic, collecting everything, retro video games, also baseball cards and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I got back into vinyl during the pandemic. So yeah.
You're sitting at home. What do you do?
Right, exactly. Well, a lot of us started a podcast. Now, see, there's another documentary situation, the podcast boom of the pandemic.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my gosh. Being a guy that's doing it, and I know, you and I have talked offline about editing podcasts and working on all that stuff. I tell you, that was a market that got really saturated really fast. And now you're kind of starting to see podcasters call themselves out, and the everything's plateauing, and only the strongest survive, my friend.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think that's funny that you said. I think it's a lot like documentary filmmaking. You see so many of these Kickstarters that get funded, and then the film never comes out, because it's easy to come up with an idea and you can shoot a really cool video for it. But then I think people get deep into it, and making a documentary is really, really, really hard, especially, to make a good one that actually has a story. The amount of editing, if you don't edit yourself, if you're not a good editor, I mean, you're going to have all this footage, and it's just so much work. So yeah, I think you saw that, like a lot of these people, like, and even after Orange Years, I was getting approached by all these people. I've got an idea. And it was just like, well, I mean, everyone can come up with an idea. Just think of something from the 80s. Alf, let's do an Alf documentary. TGIF, let's do a TGI, but it's like that. Those would be cool, but it's just a lot of work,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think people would come up with a cool idea, crowdfund it. And then it makes it harder for us now, I think, because a lot of people are scared, because they're like, well, I donated to this other film and it never came out.
Right.
So that's one thing that I hope helps ours. Like, I have 2 movies that did come out. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to just take people's money and then never make anything with it.
Right. And one thing that you are doing, from checking out all your posts and checking out the posts from the Game Changers Facebook page, is you're giving people a piece of the show as well. And I think that's one thing that gets lost in a lot of Kickstarter campaigns. I had somebody tell me a long time ago that if you want people to invest in you, you have to invest in them first. but you're giving people a return on that investment. I know one of the perks was like a producer credit or something along the lines.
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
not mistaken on that?
No,
So
that's exactly it. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I think if my listeners, viewers, anybody watching this, I'm gonna share the hell out of Scott's Kickstarter campaign as soon as this episode drops. Go check it out. Uh, make your donation. Know that this is going towards a fantastic piece of programming, fantastic piece of art. And just like Scott just said, the proof is in the pudding. The Orange Year was great. This is GWAR was great. This is going to be great.
Oh, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, I'd love for people to check it out because I want this to be good for them. I want to give people the show that they want, that will really make them go, oh, this was cool. This was worth my time. This was worth my energy. And it's called Game Changers. We're on all Facebook, Instagram. If you just do Game Changers series, Twitter, and we also our Kickstarter. If you Google Game Changers Kickstarter, it'll be there. But yeah, we have a lot of like small perks, and any bit helps. We have a couple. One where you can be an associate producer. And we are going to do a screening of this. We're going to screen the first 3 episodes because I think making people watch the whole first season in a
Right.
in a theater might be tough. But we're going to screen the first 3, and if you're an executive producer or an associate, you get to come to that and kind of hang out with Phil and stuff beforehand. And we're going to also do a live stream of it just for certain backers, where you get to be on that. So you watch it with all of us and we'll do a Q&A afterward. Yeah, that was it. And that was one thing, Taylor, you were, director of Pick It Up and The Last Blockbuster. That was one thing he told me is, you gotta get people involved, make them feel like they're part of it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's one of those things like, yeah, of course. I guess maybe I would have been afraid. Like I would have thought I was asking too much from people, but it's like, no, they want to, like we're about to drop another one where you can be an executive producer, but you also get to pick what episode we do. Because the way we have it right now is the first season is going to be 6 episodes.
Okay.
But we list a bunch of games that we want to do. 6 of them will for sure be on. 6 of those will be on the first season. Or if not, it'll be with a game that's very similar to that. But those are all the games that we're going to do. We just kind of wanted to let people know that. And if you donate, anybody, even if you donate $10, you get to vote for a game. And whichever game gets the most votes, we will definitely do that game on the first season.
Oh, wow.
But we're going to do an executive producer one. We're only going to have 2 of these where you can be an executive producer, and you don't just get to vote, you get to say a game. So you can be like, boom, I'm donating to this new executive producer, and I want you to do Tomb Raider, and we'll have to do it. And by have to, it's not going to be a chore because we will love to do it. But yeah, it's another one. It's kind of like we're going to call it like executive producer plus, where it's a new one, a new perk that we're going to drop.
Nice. So after, beyond documentary filmmaking, have you thought about making any dramatic or feature films, horror movies? Because you mentioned you were a fan of horror. Beyond any of this?
Yeah, I would really love to. I would really love to do that. I have a passion for just all film in general.
Mm-hmm.
I love documentaries, but I also love, narrative films too. I don't really consider myself a documentary filmmaker. It was kind of like that was the easiest thing for me to kind of get into.
Right.
And so I did it, but I've always wanted to, make a narrative film. And so I've partnered up with a guy named Casey Pinkston. He has a really good film on Hulu called Red Dog. It's really great. And we found out we went to the same high school and then just both ended up making films. And so he and I are writing right now. And, we're trying to be clever about it. Like, okay, how do you write something that you can make yourself? It's like why so many horror films are so successful. Get a cabin in the woods, get some people. You don't need to have a star. Boom. And you can have a successful movie.
Right.
And so we're trying to do that. What we kind of have this script where we're kind of thinking, how can we be creative and do like one location, minimal cast? I'm really, as a kid, I was a really big fan of Joe Dante. The Burbs. I love the Burbs, mixing comedy and horror. And so then Edgar Wright is a big, I'm a big fan of him. I love Shaun of the Dead. I love World's End. I love that, mixing comedy and horror. So that's what we're going to try to do, is kind of mix comedy and horror, and hopefully get that made pretty soon. We'll see.
That's awesome. So as we kind of talked about before we started recording, music tends to be this backbone that kind of feeds the body of other creative endeavors. I mean, you can see behind me, you can see the Clash, you can see the Misfits, but you also see Michael Myers, Roy Kent, Randy Macho Man Savage, and Dave Chappelle, so it's like, comic books, pro wrestling, Nickelodeon, it's just all music impacts us in so many different ways. In what ways has music influenced your level of creativity and where you're at in life, aside from just the GWAR movie?
Yeah, I think so much. One, in terms of, like you kind of asked before, like, what do I like to do? I think that I like to find a punk rock element to everything. It's got to have that. And not literally, mohawks and chains and stuff like that. But like the Nickelodeon one that we did, what really made me want to do it was, it's a story of this teacher. Nickelodeon was floundering. It was not anything. It was like a wannabe PBS that nobody cared about.
Right.
And it was a teacher, and this is the very early 80s when women were, the idea of a woman running a network was, bonkers. And also she had a background in teaching, and she kind of came in and was like, fuck you guys. I know what's up. I know what's going to happen. And everyone's like, and, she had this team and everyone was like, you guys are idiots. This is never going to work. And then look what happened. Right. I just love that. I love that so much, and then you look at like the first, there's so many cool cartoons these days, Rick and Morty and Adventure Time, all sorts of like creator run, Bob's Burgers, like cool cartoons. And that really started with Nickelodeon. Cartoons in the 80s were mainly just, the idea of cartoons for adults was not a thing really. And then the cartoons for kids were just commercials for toys, and that's not really necessarily a bad thing. Like I loved Transformers. I loved He-Man. I loved Ninja Turtles when I was a kid. There was a lot of people that did breathe art into them, but that was the main, it had to be attached to a franchise already out there. Right. And, Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy, those are the first three that they did. Mm-hmm. And they're still huge huge to this very day. And, Rugrats was about babies and they were all weird looking, they were not cute. Ren and Stimpy, obviously we know that one was very weird. And I just love the fact that it was kind of I was like, I felt like I got my head around it when that happened. I was like, oh, this is a punk rock story. Okay, yeah. And then the same with GWAR too. Like when you start thinking about them as this metal band with all these props and stuff, and some people accuse them of just being, oh, you're just a band with a gimmick. And then being like, oh, these guys are the most, even though their sound, it was punk rock. It's still, what is punk rock? Who knows this day and age? But a lot of people would consider them more of a metal band, even though they're just GWAR. They do everything. Right. But they're the punkest band out there because they do all that shit themselves. DIY. They're doing DIY, but it's not just making shirts and playing shows and booking your own tours and stuff like that. They're doing all that. Also making huge monster costumes, and they create them. They put on that show. There's no big company behind them. There's no company that makes that. They do all of that stuff themselves, and they found a way to lug it from city to city and set that up every single night. And those guys tour like constantly. So anyway, that was just what kind of, that's my, I guess it helps me from an artistic standpoint. I look for the punk rock element in everything. But then, more importantly, I think is the work ethic of it. I played in bands when I was young, and, we had a Ford F-150. We didn't even have a van. We had a Ford F-150 that we had a camper on it, and we busted out one of the windows and put a window mounted AC unit through the window of a truck
Right.
and then had a generator on the back, and we would ride in the back of a truck. So 2 guys got to ride in the actual truck, and then the rest of us would ride in the back of this truck with an AC unit through Texas, through the desert on your way to California. And we would stay wherever we could. Sometimes we stayed in the truck. You know, we at the show, we'd be like, can we stay at any of y'all's houses? And we'd find somewhere to do it. And after the show, we'd be like slinging our merch. Like I remember we'd brought all this food with us so we wouldn't have to buy food, like peanut butter and stuff like that. And we'd be like, if you buy a shirt, you also get this thing of peanut butter. Anybody, you know, just anything we could do to make it happen. Nothing is given to you. You know, I think I would see a lot of bands that, especially because it was around that time when punk rock was getting on MTV and stuff. And I'd see these bands where I would have some elements of your heroes are not good. You know, I'd see these punk bands. I remember we played with one and like people were jumping on stage to stage dive. And they're like, what is this? If somebody gets on stage again, we're going to stop playing. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, man? Right. Like, you're a punk band. And I remember when they got there, you know, and they come in with their spikes and stuff. And they're like, where are our loaders? Where are our loaders? And that became our joke from then on out. When we get to a show, we'd be like, loaders. Like, they wouldn't move their own equipment. And it's like, whatever, you know? So to have that mindset of like, nothing is given to you. If you want it, you have to make it happen. You just have to do it. Yeah. And yeah, sometimes it's not fair. You know, like there were times where, I mean, all the bitch work stuff for these movies, I do it. And I'm never like, this shouldn't fall upon me. You know, like I'm on my way to an interview and I'm also trying to go to the Chinese food place to get some food because we have to feed these people, you know, and it's like, you know, if you think you're above that stuff, good luck, you know, good luck. And so that, you know, that's why I've been able to be successful. I think it's because I can make these movies when people hear how cheap I'm making them. And Taylor does this too, which is funny because Taylor also came from that background, you know? Yeah. When you have that mindset of, I'm just going to do it, you know, and it, you can make it for way cheaper than everybody else does. Yeah. You know, most people would go, well, it's going to be at least $1 million or $500,000. Well, or I'm not going to be able to do it. And you're like, I can do it for a fraction of that.
I think you hit the nail on the head by talking about the punk rock mantra, because, you know, if you take the style of music out of it, you can still be punk if you're sticking your thumb into conventional wisdom and what people expect and their structure. If you can be a disruptor and disrupt somebody's structure and still find a way to accomplish your end goal, there's nothing more punk rock than that. And if you've been a musician, you know that work ethic, you know what it takes to be successful, because it's one of the hardest businesses to be successful in consistently, because everybody's kind of looking for their next big thing, or, you know, one day you're relevant, the next day you're not. But I can see how that's applicable to all avenues of life for sure, especially in the creative world.
It totally is. And it you know, not just about the work. Like, I'm really lucky to get to have done what I've done. And it taught me that love. Like, I can just remember I was like 20 years old, you know, and we're driving across the country. You know, I'm this dude, I grew up in Texas, you know, and not even in like a hip part of Texas. And I'm in this truck and I'm watching, you know, America go past me, you know, through the, you know, on your way from I-10, you know, from Texas over to California, and there's just desert everywhere. And I'm looking out there, and like, we stopped the truck that we were in, and we just got out because there was, I mean, you could see the Milky Way, you know, you could see it. And I'm like, dude, I am 20 years old. I've never gone anywhere. And I'm here with like my 2 best friends.
Yep.
Getting to go everywhere I've ever wanted to go. You know, LA, San Francisco, Oregon, I mean, New York, everywhere. I'm getting to go everywhere I ever wanted to go for free. We didn't make any money, but our trip was paid for, you know? Right. We made sure we made enough money that we never went into the red. You know, if it cost us this much to get from this city to this city, we knew that's how much we had to make there. And I just felt so lucky, and it gave me a love for that. Like, and that's so, like we had said before, getting to meet Weird Al and go to all these cool places is the payment. It made me fall in love with that. And it's just such a fun thing to do. And yeah, and I have fun doing that. I've met the coolest people by doing that, you know, like, can I crash at anybody's house? You know, I throughout the Nickelodeon movie, I was constantly doing that. And I'd stay with somebody, you know, and then make friends with them. And now they're friends. You know, I made friends with a guy, and he got me into the Magic Castle, which have you ever heard of that before? The Magic Castle in Los Angeles?
No.
So it's so cool. It's like an old, like over 100-year-old building in Los Angeles, like an old mansion. And it's where the like Magicians Guild has their home, like the actual legit Magicians Guild.
Oh, cool.
And it's all weird in there and stuff. And you can't get in unless you're invited by a magician.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
No matter what, like you have to be invited. And there's like a dress code to get in there too. And yeah, I was hanging out with this guy, Bill. I met him through working with the Orangers. He was a producer on it. And then he became a producer on This Is GWAR. And we're still working on stuff together. But he was like, oh, I could get you in there if you want. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I know like a bunch of magicians. I'll get you in. So he called up one of his magician buddies, and I got in. And it's the craziest place ever. It's like all these like winding hallways and stuff. And then you'll walk into a room and there'll be a magician show going on there. And some are just doing it at the bar. Some are like in a big room. They have a really large room in there. It was so cool, you know, I mean, and to get to do that, I mean, that's crazy. When I say that to a lot of people and they're like, oh, that's so cool. I'm like, I've been there. And they're like, what? You know, that's crazy. But yeah, the Magic Castle, if you can ever get in there, it's really cool. It's awesome.
You know, a lot of what, you know, we've been talking about is that life experience that these endeavors give you. I have had to explain it more than my fair handful of times to people that have taken more of a conventional life path, that I pretty much said exactly what you just said in summation was, you know what, maybe I didn't take the conventional path in life, but I have probably a million more stories than that guy over there.
Yeah.
And I can pass those stories on to my kids, and my kids can pass those stories on to their kids. And if my kids want to pursue something creatively, I can also steer them in the right direction. I can be the cautionary tale so they do things right, based off the things I did wrong. My dad was a musician, and he was quite an accomplished one. I don't need to be Johnny name dropper, but he played with a lot of well-known people. And now my daughter's kind of starting to dabble into getting into bands and all that stuff. But I say all of that to say that you can't discount the education you get from life experience. And sometimes those life experiences come from the most unexpected places.
They really do, you know, and like you're saying, you know, it's that balance. I think when I first became a father, it was like, and this was the right decision. It was just like, that's it. But, you know, I think that being a good father is showing your kids, like, you know, that you can follow your dreams, and giving them somebody to, like, you know, yeah, I put food on the table, you know, yeah, I take care of them. I do all this stuff, but also like you said, stories, like they could be like, that's really cool that you did that, Dad. Like that inspires me to do stuff. And, you know, while making the Orange Years, my dad died during that time, and it was so heartbreaking. It was awful. But I remember the thing that got us through it was me and my brother, and then my dad's brothers and all of his friends were sitting there telling the crazy stories about him. Like, you know, your dad did this one time. One guy told a story about how he got a hook stuck in his mouth. He had something. It was just all these crazy stories, and we're all telling them, because my dad was a practical joker. You know, he's a goofy guy, and it was like that stuff got it thinking of him as a human, not just as a dad. Like, yes, it's awesome that he did all the dad things for me, but like thinking of him as a man, you know, not a dad, is like really awesome, really, really great. And I'm grateful that I get to do that. So that kind of taught me something a little bit, I guess.
Yes. Fantastic, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So I'm going to throw my wrap up question to you. And this is kind of an off the wall one. I ask it to everybody that does my show. everybody from MMA fighters to musicians and beyond. And I think it's more important that I ask this right now because we've had a tumultuous 3 weeks in our world. What's your advice for making the world a better place tomorrow than what it is today?
I think that there's this advice when people say it. People say this and they think it applies to everyone else. You know, like things like people really need to, when there's an important topic, do your research on it. And people are like, yep, they do. Those people over there do need to do that. And it's like, I would say maybe some of the advice you would give other people, take an honest look at yourself, you know, and like, these people really need to get educated over here. Instead of doing that, go, am I one of those people? Am I one of those people that needs to be educated? Because I think that the social media and stuff like that, you know, there's a lot of good stuff to it, but I think it's made us all think that we're smarter than we are. I think instead of using the internet to become smart, which we could do, we have everything at our fingertips. Anything you could want to learn to do, you can. But instead of using it to become smart, we use the internet to show other people how smart we already think we are. Use the internet to become as smart as you try to pretend like you are online. You know, like I say, when you point the finger at somebody, you got the other one's pointed right back at you. It's just, you know, instead of criticizing other people, maybe take some honest reflection at yourself and think, is maybe some of the advice you're giving to other people, do I need that advice too?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. It's funny you say that because I think I posted something on Threads the other day about how I miss the era of flip phones when people had to go to a computer to get on the internet because people weren't so reactive, you know, like people now have the opportunity to react to everything that's presented to them. So it's emboldened them and it's put them on soapboxes. So I wholeheartly agree with your takeaways there. No, Scott, man, I am so glad we're connected. You know, just so you know, anybody that does my show, I consider a friend for life. So I'm glad we know each other now. I'm glad to say we're friends. Folks, if you have not checked out the Orange Years or This Is GWAR, check them out as soon as humanly possible. Make sure you become a contributor to the Kickstarter campaign for Game Changers. That is going to be a game changer of a documentary show. Scott, thanks for doing the show, man. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you.
The world's a much better place with you in it, my friend.